Good morning, everyone. This is Nevin, your host of New Ideas. With me is Lauren Morris of Conservatives for Ukraine. Lauren has been an activist for Ukrainian independence and freedom for a number of years now. She has visited Ukraine as well as other parts of Eastern Europe and follows national security issues, especially when it pertains to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Welcome back to the show, Lauren. How you doing?
Oh, good morning. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. Nice to be back.
Yeah. It's been a minute.
It has been, and there's been a lot that's been transpiring since we last met on our program. Ukraine achieved a massive, miraculous feat called Operation Spiderweb. And if you want, could you elaborate to the audience what that was, and how is Ukraine doing on the battlefront as well as in the wars of ideas?
Right. So Operation Spiderweb is going to be another one of those innovative battlefield plans that Ukraine pulled off, much to the astonishment and amazement of the rest of the world. It's these kinds of moments where I feel sorry for people who are not watching this war because of all the greatness and that they are missing out on. So, it's a combination of operational work and strategic work, and they went in on what some are calling another incursion on a smaller scale. They had to set up logistics over on the Russian side in order to get trucks in, whether or not some people are saying they may have set up a shell company over there and were operating a trucking company for a while, which would make sense. I mean, that's how covert and undercover operations are done. You infiltrate, you set up your base camp, and then you operate from there. So they did, and they drove some trucks in, and the footage that we have all seen that's been out there on the internet is of one particular spot near an air base, an Air Force base, and they got the trucks in there. They released a hatch, and drones went out. And so it was a deep strike within Russia. It was a successful strike. They took out, the reports are a third of or 2/3. Is it a third or 2/3? I've forgotten now, of the Russian Air Force. And some of the planes were flight ready. Some of them were not. It really doesn't matter. But they took out some bombers, and it was just, spectacular and very successful. And I think one of the most poignant things that I saw recently was when Trump was ripping Zelensky's face off in the Oval Office, telling him, "You don't have the cards. You don't have the cards." Consider what's going through his mind if he's thinking about Operation Spiderweb, which was a long game and took him a long time to pull off. It was in progress at that moment in terms of the planning and execution stages, not of the actual attack, but the planning and the execution stages up until the day that they decided to pull the trigger on this operation. So this is another backlash against Trump for him, saying things that are deeply disturbing to all of us. It just proved him wrong, and it was, of course, they all got fried on social media over it.
Yeah. Well, in our last conversation, we talked about how Russian influence operations influenced the MAGA, the conservative movement, the libertarian movement, the Republican Party. What is going on at this point in the movement? Now, I will say the Trump administration has some very, let's just say, questionable characters, and I'm putting it very charitably. People like Darren Beatty, who has posted pro-CCP and pro-Russia positions, and positions that sort of merge this extreme social conservatism and dislike for cultural liberalism in America, and saying that the CCP and Russia were far superior. You take a look at Tulsi Gabbard, you take a look at the influence of Steve Bannon. And look, on economic issues, I would align more with Steve Bannon than other parts of MAGA, but his position on Russia is deeply disturbing, and his ties with Miles Guo, who some have argued is a double agent for the People's Republic of China, is concerning. You take a look at Elon Musk's influence, although I guess that's on the wane these days, even though he's an extremely powerful figure in American politics, because of course we're an oligarchy with democratic trappings. We're not a true representative republic anymore with this much money and influence over our system. And Elon Musk, of course, has a tremendous amount of ties with the CCP and ties with Russia that are not exactly known to the public. So you have these issues within MAGA. There is a contingent in MAGA led by, people like yourself. I don't know if you identify yourself as MAGA or not, but within the conservative movement that understands the threat of Russia and the importance of Ukraine defending itself. So what's going on in the world of conservative politics vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine? And did Operation Spiderweb maybe wake some people up on Ukraine's willingness to live as a free and independent nation? What's going on?
Well, I think the root cause, not to use a cliche, but the root cause of the problem in the MAGA movement, and that would be the audience members of Alex Jones, Steve Bannon, and all of these people, Tulsi Gabbard, Tucker Carlson, Charlie Kirk, the whole crew that are aligned with each other, is their lack of knowledge regarding Russia and Ukraine. And it's a huge gap. I mean, I am shocked when I talk to conservative friends. They don't know, they don't care. And so therefore they're really blind, but yet they still have opinions. And most of them are negative against Zelensky, and they are pro-Russian, and they're ridiculous. And so now that not just Operation Spiderweb, but the fact that there are so many people, basically all of Europe and a large portion of the United States, who are content creators, or their social media have some kind of a social media profile. And there have been so many events that have happened in Ukraine that have proven that that the propaganda that Russia wielded and attacked the conservative movement particularly, they're starting to see it, because it's just piling up, and it's just one after another. Putin is in the wrong. Ukraine is in the right. Putin is losing the war. Ukraine has fought bravely, and they've been innovative and creative. They've been excellent with the narrative. And I find that the conservative movement, outside of probably a couple of people who are willing to say, hey, I was wrong, and I got swayed and I got fooled, just like all the never Trumpers did, or the Trump haters, when the left was attacking Trump over his morality and his business dealings. The same types of attacks were levied upon Zelensky. And all of the people that supported Trump and defended Trump then fell for all of the gossip and the trash that was being levied against Zelensky. They just fell for it. Why? Because they worshipped at the altar of Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon, and that's how it happens. So we are trying. So they're just quiet now. I've only had one person call me up on the phone, and they didn't say that they were sorry, but they just said, I'm not going to follow that Jeffrey Sachs guy anymore. And oh my gosh, what's happening to Tucker Carlson? And why is everybody calling Steve Bannon a Jew hater now? And all these people, they're starting to see that they're outraged profiteers. They've lied to their base, and they are causing a great deal of damage to the Trump administration by the things that they say every day, which are being shown over and over and over by the open source intelligence community to be lies.
Right. Yeah, so true. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. Steve Bannon is an interesting case because back in 2016 or so, he was quoted as saying, having a more realistic view about Russia, that it was a state capitalist economic system, that it was an authoritarian kleptocracy, and that it was an imperialist power. So, of course, I throw to the audience, why the shift all of a sudden? When you take a look at Alex Jones, granted, this is on a more left wing or Democratic leaning YouTube page, or Right Wing Watch, which I mean, I kind of take objection to. It's a little bit of a, but it reproduces Alex Jones back in the late 1990s and early 2000s, and it's clearly him stating that that Putin is basically former KGB. He's a communist. They're in alliance with China, and that they want to destroy the United States. That China had agreements and Russia had agreements with Al Qaeda, Taliban. This is what he said on that video. Again, why the change? And I ask that as a rhetorical question. I have different trains of thoughts or different answers on that. So I take a look at that. Charlie Kirk never really had a particularly that I remember pro or anti-Russia position previous. He was a proponent of outsourcing and free trade globalism in his 2012 book. He was an apologist for multinational corporations. And I think people like Charlie Kirk, for example, are opportunists. They go with the wind. It's kind of like Mark Levin. Mark Levin, the author, very Reaganite commentator, he was very much a hardcore free trader with China. He said in 2011 and 2012, and this was clipped on various conservative sites, where he was angrily denouncing the protectionist callers who were worried about trade with China. And he just insulted them in his typical fashion. And he said, he was paraphrasing Margaret Thatcher when he said, countries don't trade with countries. The people of China want to trade with the people of America, and blah, blah, blah. And so he made an about face on China. So I think part of the issue within the conservative incorporated community is they're going with the wind, so to speak. Which direction is the wind blowing? If it's leaning more towards Russia, then we're going to go with that. Tucker Carlson is a troubling case because even Russian officials and leaked Russian state documents have pointed to him in Fox News as a sympathetic network. So that is very revealing unto itself. On the other side of the equation, I mean, Mark Levin is, for example, who I just was highly critical of. He has consistently taken the pro-Ukrainian independence position, which I appreciate. Michael Savage has not. Michael Savage is another one who's an interesting case. Michael Savage had taught me certain things from a more populist and economically interventionist point of view, ironically, like about the Glass-Steagall Act that was abolished by Clinton and the Republicans in 1999. He taught me a lot of interesting things. And he used to welcome a caller who you may know, Lauren, Jimmy from Brooklyn, who's a gentleman who I've been in touch with for a number of years. So is Jeff Nyquist, as well as Trevor Loudon. In fact, they have a lot of radio programs with them. And Savage used to be very critical of Russia before 2012. And he used to take a quasi-Galitzynite kind of view on the nature of Russia. Not quite that far, but there were hints of it. And he said that the communist murderers want to eliminate us all. And he talked about Russia and China's alliance with Islamic fundamentalism and radicalism abroad. He gave a couple of good monologues on that. He started a shift in 2012 by claiming, and he has claimed this even today, that Russia, for example, has a freer economy than the United States. And, I think Ben Shapiro.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Ben Shapiro claimed that like 10 to 15 years ago, too, as well. He was very kind of schizophrenic on Russia at that time. But yeah, he had said that. And then he basically, in his latest books, he has basically said that we should let Russia back into the World Economic Community. that we should collaborate with them on various projects and whatnot. So he did an about face. And then I asked the audience why. So I think there's a case of where you have many individuals that know exactly what's going on with Russia. They're familiar with the arguments. They used to align more with our side on this. And I understand people can change their minds on certain things, but they have taken the opposite extreme of appeasement towards Russia, or just such a benign and naive view, when the intelligence information, when the public information clearly shows that Russia is hostile to the West. Now, they have their strengths, they have their weaknesses, so do we in the West, including the United States. But when we take a look at the situation at large, Russia has had ties. Let's talk about even within the United States. Russia has ties with CPI through Caleb Maupin. He's a communist. They have ties with the Uyghur People's Socialist Revolutionary Group, the FSB. Russian FSB has ties with them, and even the Biden-era Justice Department even prosecuted its leaders on that count. You have Russia, for at least since the time of President George W. Bush, backing the Taliban with training and weapons. You had the FSB under Boris Yeltsin training Islamic fundamentalists. And that was courtesy of the revolutions of the former FSB officer, Alexander Litvinenko. You have Russia backing all these right-wing populist parties and leftist groups, or portions of the left, I should say, throughout Europe, gaining footholds in Hungary and Serbia, and of course having a close ally in Belarus. Although Viktor Orban and his political party seems to be making noises that are seemingly distancing Hungary from Russia. Of course, one could speculate as to why he has done that as of late. But still, Hungary, at least up until recently, was a firm Russian ally in many ways within NATO. So I can go on and on and on. Russia continues to engage in operations of social decomposition in the United States. You look at the leaked documents of Prigozhin, which talks about how they backed political movements, including Trump, arguing that it would accelerate internal contradictions within the United States. I mean, it's very, very, look, they have Americans on TV of radical persuasions of all types, including the head of the PSL, the Party of Socialism and Liberation. Its head, Brian Becker, used to be a bigwig in the Workers' World Party. At least until recently, he had his own show on Sputnik TV, which is all Russian. So Russia is clearly not a friend of the United States. And this is why we need to support Ukraine, because if Russia gains, God forbid, a victory over Ukraine, cripples it or installs a puppet government, that has potential negative ramifications for Europe. I don't mean to go on and on. I just want to give the audience kind of a history of really what's going on, because it's very upsetting when people say, oh, Russia's not a threat and we're forcing Russia to be unfriendly. No, I'm cataloging different examples of how Russia is directly against the United States. So if you want to comment further on what I had said, that's fine, or if you have any additional insights and information.
No, it's just how the information comes down, and the history is complex, and you really have to spend time. If you're one of these people who can't find Ukraine on a map, and you're a sitting congressperson or senator, maybe you ought to crack open some books, or spend some time on YouTube and learn about Russia and what they're doing. I mean, it's upsetting to me to see a picture of Friedrich Merz telling the president of the United States that we are not going to allow war criminals to sit at our table. And so Trump, in my view, just keeps getting humiliated over and over and over again. I think they were like sharks around him at the G7 the other day. And Merz is much stronger than Olaf Scholz, I think, when he says things. He's very frank about things. Kind of like, are you going to do to me what you did to Zelensky? You know, Georgia Maloney, she's a strong person as well. And I think they had Trump cornered. And I don't think he left the G7 so much because he had to come back and deal with Iran. I think he left the G7 because nobody agrees with him. And he's now in a position of really being an outcast with those people, because he needs to come into the reality of who Putin is and what he's doing, and that you can't sit down and have friendly birthday conversations with a mass murdering child killer. So why is Trump so out of the loop? And when is he going to join the party?
Well, what do you think Trump's issue is, based on your research and your communications with other experts in the field of Russia's influence operations against the United States? Do you have any theories as to this, or
well,
no?
I think Trump is just in denial. He is in denial mode. He's looking for any blade of grass that he can turn over to try to redeem Putin. I don't think it's some kind of crazy psyop, and that Trump knows what he's doing, and he's just, playing him. I mean, when you study his body language and you look at Trump, he's pretty transparent about things. And it was obvious from his body language and the looks on his face, sitting at the table at the G7, that he was unwelcome, really. And, they weren't really happy for him to be there, because he's always saying things that are just embarrassing, I think, to the American public. And it just goes to show, I think, that he has some knowledge gaps. And I don't think you can make a trade deal and then all of a sudden the aggressor is going to stop being the aggressor. I think that's what he thinks. I think he thinks and he believes that if everybody was economically prosperous and happy, that there would be no terrorism in the world. That's my opinion. That's my opinion. And I think it's really scary. Does he not understand what the massive military buildup that Russia has going in Belarus right now? Does he not? You would think that he would see it. And it's also an embarrassment, I think, as well, when you see the United States have their relationship with Israel and make the statements that they make about Israel, while Ukraine is there fighting by itself practically. In a way, they feel abandoned. Now, granted, I think the weapons are pouring into Ukraine. Ukraine's got a lot of support. Trump can also say, look, I've always said this is Europe's war. Y'all are rich. Handle it. Handle this situation. That's kind of easy, right? Because then you have Europe saying we can't do it without the United States help. Well, can they or can't they? And then you have the voices that say Biden should have stomped Putin back into the Stone Age when he was in office. It just keeps getting worse. The body count keeps rising. Also, Trump's negotiation efforts have failed. He didn't stop the war in 24 hours. So when he says things like that war would have never have happened if I was president, it just falls flat on its face. You can't speculate and make those kinds of statements when you are now in office and you have sworn that you were going to just manage everything with the back of your hand and everybody was just going to fall into place and do what you say. That's not happening. And it's because he's on the wrong side of the war.
Yeah, no, I think these are all interesting and very valid points that you have. One of Trump's vulnerabilities, and I wrote about it in my Useful Idiots on the Right series on Substack. And here's an interesting, I'm going to share with the audience for those who haven't read this, uh, some quotations here. There was Natalia Dubinina, whose father, who was the Soviet UN ambassador back in the 1980s. And her father, the Soviet UN ambassador, dealt with Trump. And Dubinina recalled that, quote, Trump melted at once when he was told by her father that Trump Tower was the first building he visited after landing in New York. Dubinina recalled that Trump is an emotional person, somewhat impulsive. He needs recognition, and of course, when he gets it, he likes it. My father's visit worked on him, meaning Trump, like honey to a bee. And I say that the Chinese seem to apply the same flattery towards Trump during his first term as president. And according to Trump's trade advisor, Peter Navarro's October 25th, 2017 memo to the president, and Navarro published these in one of his latest books before the election of November 2024. Navarro wrote, in numerous meetings, the president has expressed his affection and admiration for China's President Xi Jinping. The clear danger here is that our president may be charmed into submission, and this possibility likewise represents a signal failure of President Trump's intelligence briefings. So yeah, I think Trump is extremely malleable. We saw that during the debate on the first tax and spending bill, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017. He liked some really good proposals by Senator Sherrod Brown, formerly in Ohio, legislation that would have helped the working class and industry in the United States. But the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Paul Ryan and libertarian types then got to Trump and they changed his mind, without really, and they were the last ones in the room. And Trump tends to listen to the last people in the room. And unfortunately, those forces got it and created what, in my opinion, was a terrible tax bill. It was, again, a failure of supply side economics. I mean, you and I might have differing opinions on that. I don't know. So you had that. And other domestic forces in American politics and conservative incorporated, like ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, they also mentioned that Trump is kind of like a blank slate. Others have mentioned that Trump really doesn't sit down and read books. For example, He just digests the headlines or watches TV and that's it. So I think you have this problem here. And of course, like many large major American businessmen in American history, Trump did a lot of business with Russia and China, and so did his family. And they kind of knew it was a bad place. Eric Trump actually admitted years ago when they were trying to do business in Russia that Russia is, quote, a really scary place. But to Trump's credit, in his books that he has written or ghost written, but he still goes through the books, we know that, and has a sharp eye because Trump is conscious of his image and how his ideas are portrayed. He did call Russia in the 1990s a nuclear Walmart that proliferated weapons technology to rogue states throughout the world like North Korea, Iran, and Iraq. He, in 2015, in another book, he discussed with concern Russia's efforts to create a Eurasian Union. So he was hip to Duginism before Duginism really became known here in the United States. So you had many of these different positions that Trump had that were kind of realistic about Russia, that had an understanding, at least in print. But his actual record with business, like many other American business people, as well as his personality, his vulnerabilities to flattery and manipulation, I think that's what's the problem. And I know from mutual friends of ours, let's just say, I don't know if this is in print, so I really can't really elaborate, but I know Trump was also briefed on Golitsyn's views And he just basically said, I don't believe that, I don't agree with it, and just that was it, end of story. Now, again, I'm not expecting everyone to agree with us on Golitsyn, but, you know, and his views on the evolution of the Soviet Union, but I'm sure he was given, hopefully, enough persuasive factual information.
You know, think of it this
just,
way. He's what is he, 78? He just turned 79.
Correct.
Yes. Okay. Have you noticed how hunched over he is? He is really, since he's been shot, his posture has gotten worse.
Yes.
And maybe he's made some statements back in the 80s or the 90s, or he's, you know, I would imagine that he's probably forgotten all of that stuff that he said. You know, when people say Trump knows, okay, but it hasn't really sunk in, I don't think. And, you know, with his ego, he does think that he can fix things based on his relationship with somebody. These guys are not going to stop making weapons, and we're definitely in a race war right now with the weapons. One of the things that I think is the heart and soul is the battlefield. That is the heart and soul of the war. That's where everything happens and everything takes place, right? And so the weapons that are being made right now are fascinating to watch, because you can just see how powerful some things are and what they can do with them, and how the Ukrainians have made incredible advancements. And learning about what kind of weapons the Russians have that they are able to deploy and or are already forward positioned in some theater somewhere, and the weapons that China has, and how they compare with our weapons and what we can do. And you know, I just hope that that there are enough clear heads around Trump that can brief him in the way that he needs to be briefed, so that he makes the right decision. Because right now it looks as though he's trying to pound the square peg into the round hole. And here's another thing that I have said from day one. I think in our circle of people that we know, I was the first person that actually wrote an article about Steve Bannon on my blog. And I said, you know, Bannon's war room misses the war in Ukraine, you know, because they came out with this narrative. They thought the war would be over in a week or a month. And here we are. And, you know, these guys are in a corner, and they don't really have an off ramp they're not the open source intelligence community, which now includes all the journalists of Europe and in the United States and elsewhere in the world that use this kind of information, are not going to let people forget what they have said in the past, and that they were wrong, and they're going to be continued to be hammered that they were wrong. So my point is that I'm trying to get to is people like Trump or Steve Bannon or Tucker Carlson or any of these people that I would put under the umbrella of an old guard in terms of journalism or whatever, they can no longer lie to us and say whatever the heck they want to say anymore, because there's too much information out there that the average person or researcher, professional or citizen, can get their hands on. And the narratives that these politicians and Steve Bannon think that they can tell us, the backlash is too great. And the truth is out there for them to get. And I think it has blindsided them. That's what I've always said. It's blindsided them. And now you've got these researchers and these journalists who have come out with these incredible infographics showing the Russian connections to Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson, their business dealings and everything like that. But we haven't really seen that on Trump, have we? You know, what types of business dealings does he have going on in Russia that we don't know about? Is that why he is behind Putin so much? Why is he behind Putin so much? Because he is sacrificing his integrity. So it's not okay for the United States to take a knee to our enemies, right? You don't want to die on your knees. You want to be that person that dies on their feet fighting, even though you may be losing. Okay, but it's okay for Ukraine to take a knee. And for some reason, that living under Putin would be some kind of utopia, especially with the hatred between that has been built up between the actual Ukrainian people and the Russian people.
True. Very true. Yeah, with Trump, I think, as I said, it is his business dealings. Many people have covered that, and yes, granted, they are some of them are partisan, anti-Trump, anti-Republican Party journalists and analysts. David K. Johnston, who was recently on the program, he has studied Trump intensely, had over 100 hours of time with him, and he basically says that Trump is basically heavily influenced by the Russians.
Yeah.
There's a lot of business dealings. I've covered that in one of my essays on Substack too, as well, to the point where, as I said, Eric Trump said, look, we're doing a lot of business with Russia, but got to tell you, Russia is a very scary place. And Trump is aware,
Well,
but
think
yet
of
they
that.
do businesses. And this is a problem. This is a horse that I continuously beat, much to the chagrin of some in the audience and some of Jeff
Yeah.
Lundquist's followers and conservatives, that this is a problem of American capitalism and how it's configured. And we have to explore our relationships and how are we going to control them and limit their influence, especially in the name of national security. And that prompts us to larger, bigger systemic questions of how do we strengthen our campaign finance laws? How do we overturn Supreme Court decisions stretching as far back as 1976 that allow corporations to essentially bribe politicians through campaign finance, and they wrap it up under the rubric of free speech? We have to take a look at lobbying reforms. And unfortunately, the conservative side, so-called conservative side, has been worse than even the Democrats on this issue, at least rhetorically.
Yeah.
Our side, or the right, I don't call myself a conservative, as you know, I'm a radical civic nationalist. I'm not an ideological leftist, and I'm not a conservative by the standards of the past 40 or 50 years, although I like conservative goals. Let me say that very clearly. I don't mean to digress. I like what conservatives claim they support: national defense, entrepreneurialism and private property and private enterprise, strong families, different things like that. I do believe in the Second Amendment, obviously, with certain levels of strict common sense restrictions. So there's a lot of quote unquote conservatism and stated Republican Party goals that I like. But when you start to peel away the layers of the onion, you catch mask off moments with them, or you really take a look at their opportunism and deception.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it just was not for me. It's a very long story. I've covered that in other programs and in my writings. So with getting back to Trump, I think it's a issue of business ties, which it's documented that he's had it. Although, in fairness to Trump, he's not unique. There are plenty of billionaires and multimillionaires of all political persuasions in this country that have maintained business ties with the old Soviet Union and then the successor Russian Federation. So I think with Trump, he has a lot of business ties. I suspect he may admire aspects of Vladimir Putin and the Russian Federation system, perhaps. And I was cautiously optimistic when he nominated Marco Rubio, General Ratcliffe, General Kellogg, who's no longer in the administration, and others who had a more realistic view of Russia. Now, when you have people like Darren Beatty, Tulsi Gabbard, influencers like Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon, although Trump is rather upset with Carlson, calls him kooky. You have individuals like that, Alex Jones, Drew Pavlo, if you're familiar with him, he's an Australian, and he is a Australian influencer and foreign policy activist, and he is very much on the side of Ukraine and Taiwan and the US, and he's extremely hostile towards totalitarianism. And he had a debate with Alex Jones, and I actually saw it live. And the way Jones acted was so unprofessional, not even so much unprofessional, but he kept on playing whack-a-mole, and he kept on moving the goalposts constantly, would not address really any of Drew Pavlo's points. And I'm going to say something controversial here now. Even the John Birch Society, which used to, maybe still does, endorse Golitsyn's New Lies for Old, his first book, and the second book, The Perestroika Deception. William F. Jasper, Alex Newman, Christian Gomez, they used to do a lot of great reporting on Russia's support for terrorism not only during the 1970s, 1980s, but also during the 2000s. And they had a clear picture of what Putin was. They have really come against Ukraine tremendously. And when you look at a cursory look, granted, at their New American, which is the name of their journal, their magazine, and it's on both online as well as in print, there's really not a lot on Russia. And really, it lacks the same fire in the belly that they used to have. So I question what's going on there.
Well, I think it's easy. I mean, people do lose their way. Okay, humans are faulty, and they lose their way, and things change in their lives. And I think that when they become corrupt, a lot of it has to do with all kinds of outside pressures that we don't see and that we don't know about. And so I think that was clearly the thing, with Bannon and these guys. It's an opportunity to rail against Ukraine for whatever reason. They're getting paid, or their donors want them to have this particular narrative. But now everybody's fighting, everybody's against everybody. And, the inner circles with the Trump camp and the conservative right-wing media, which have really come out and taken the anti-war crowd narratives. No war at all. And some of these people in the anti-war international community are some of the wealthiest people in the world, and they've been around for a very long time. So if you come out and you're like Greta Thunberg or Steve Bannon or Charlie Kirk, and you are going to adopt an anti-war narrative in general overall, then you might just be able to get some of that money. And so, of course, these people have been pressuring Trump and have been pressuring the media. Of course, that they have infiltrated the right wing, and it doesn't. And now, when we see everybody fighting, and you see Tucker come out and just be absolutely crazy, the things he said about Russia, you watch his numbers tank. I think we're watching Steve Bannon's numbers tank. And we're really seeing people who are on the side of good versus people who are on the side of evil. And at this point, in 4 years into this war, if you can't see or accept who the aggressor is, and the data is out there, the atrocities that have been committed environmentally, culturally, socially, and in every single way to humiliate the Ukrainian people. If you can't see who the bad guy is, and you have an argument that is so weak that it's like, well, Russia was provoked by NATO, or Russia was provoked by Ukraine, I'm sorry, your intellect needs a day back in class.
Yeah, especially when, and we're going to move on to Iran, because we got another 15, 20 minutes or so. I'll add on to your last statement that it was certain NATO countries like Germany and France that sold Russia weapons, which I'm sure you know, companies like Rheinmetall and others that sold literal weapons to Putin's Russia. This was not that long before Russia's attack on eastern Ukraine. You have Britain under the thrall of neoliberalism and, quote, open trade and financialization, which allowed Russia to basically colonize or infiltrate the financial markets in the city of London and to be a large energy exporter. And that's a direct result of neoliberalism in both the Labour Party as well as certainly the Conservative Party, which was received the impetus of Thatcher and Friedrich Hayek. And
the migrant issue. Don't forget about that. Flooding Britain with migrants for years. Islamic migrants, to be specific.
Correct, which is a reservoir, amongst other things, of cheap labor. And these are people from other parts of the empire. And this is where, I have questioned neoliberalism or Reaganism or Thatcherism, because even though it's against communism as a political system and an economic system, they also tend to believe in a theoretical basis that if we open up our doors to these countries and have the cheapest possible labor or the cheapest possible goods, the theory goes that everybody benefits, that there's no zero-sum game in economics. And that's just not true when you look at the reality of economics. Somebody is always trying to win, or somebody's always trying to get more of the pie. Or in the case of the intersection of geopolitics and economics, it's bad geopolitical actors that are always trying to gain advantages, as well as ones that we view as good geopolitical actors as well, to be fair. And that's one of the reasons why I have sort of really deserted so-called free market fundamentalism, or what friend of the show, Pat Choate, calls market absolutism and whatnot, without abandoning the basic features of a free market economy. I've realized over the years that it needs controls. You can't bring the cheapest possible labor. Why? Because you potentially might have bad actors within the community, or they're going to undercut American labor now, or British labor, whichever, in the home country. Now, before we go to Iran, I will point out one thing about immigration, where I depart from much of the immigration debate on the right, is I generally, for my entire lifetime, I've never liked bullies. I've never liked powerful people unjustly throwing their weight and just pushing around people who are individually powerless. To me, that's a big no-no in my book. That's a triggering, something that triggers me big time. And one thing I find even in the immigration debates in the United States, and I'm not going to discuss immigration at this point, but as a side point, there's nary a peep about or actions punishing employers, especially large employers, that knowingly exploit immigrants, whether illegal, undocumented, as well as legitimate work visa holders, whether it's the H-1B visas in this country or the H-2 series visas. And they're kept as virtual slaves, even down here in my state, in the state of Florida, where I've lived since 1997. So this is one thing where thinking about the issues, I look about where does power lie and how do you address power imbalances to achieve a sense of balanced justice. And that's where I come from. So, I've really done a rethinking over these past many, many years of my life. And, but going on to Iran, Iran is a big backer of Russia. We know that they've supplied drones to Russia in strikes against Ukraine. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there were rumors of Iranian Revolutionary Guards, or certainly mercenaries, fighting in the Russian army. Iran has verbally backed Russia's aggression against Ukraine. So I know you represent and lead and founded Conservatives for Ukraine, but Iran does play a role in this war. And I can't help but to ask you, do you have a position, or does your organization have a position on the recent Israeli strikes against Iran's nuclear program?
Well, I think you might want to have Claire Lopez on for that, to get really in depth with that, because she's an expert in Iranian history, and so she can add a lot more context than I would. What was your question? Repeat the question again.
Sure, no problem. No, I just wanted some feelings because, I mean, my position, which I've outlined in one of my essays on the positive and negative aspects of the Trump administration, and I do assert in my essay, one of my essays on Substack on Trump, that Trump was correct in withdrawing from the JCPOA, which was the so-called Iran deal, because Iran was cheating. And I mean, I don't know if we have the time to go through and read everything. I mean, I'm happy to inform the audience, because what's concerning, as you pointed out earlier, is the so-called right-wing anti-war people. Their arguments are indistinguishable from Code Pink, the International Action Center, International Answer, and the rest of the Iran apologists. I mean, I listen to left-wing YouTubers and commentators, and it's like I understand the issues about boots on the ground and regime change. It did not work out well in Afghanistan or Iraq, and I'm one of those dwindling folks that actually not only believes, but has done the research so that Iraq did have weapons of mass destruction.
Yes, they did.
But much of the public opinion had shifted in the other direction, and that's one of the biggest failures of the George W. Bush administration, that they did not really push that hard enough, because there were captured Iraqi documents from the old Ba'athist government which indicated that supply orders, for example, and everything else, purchase orders. Inside on the News, which is a defunct publication, they had articles by Ken Timmerman, who's one of the America's experts on Iraq's weapons of mass destruction program, wrote a really thick book called Death Lobby. I highly recommend it. And Timmerman reported that there were coalition as well as American troops that found literal weapons of mass destruction, not just old shells, but actually barrels with skull and crossbones, and that were mislabeled, obviously to probably deceive weapons inspectors at the time. So, and they were also backing Al Qaeda. They had ties with Al Qaeda because the enemy of my enemy is my only true friend. I mean, there was a short period for a couple of months that Iraq backed the Iranian revolution of the Ayatollah Khomeini and the Islamists. Incidentally, why? Because it was perceived as a blow to Zionism and U.S. imperialism. How do I know that? They said it. I actually found the statements on LexisNexis Academic Universe. I read it with my own eyes and I quote it. And, so my thing is that with Iran, it's the same situation. It's the same arguments. Oh, Iran, they were innocent. Their nuclear weapons program, well, the only reason why they were doing that is because Trump pulled out of the Iran deal and blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm going to go through a few items here, if you don't mind. For the show, you feel free to comment and do some outros. After Iran purportedly halted its nuclear weapons program in 2003, there were internal Iranian memos prove that senior scientists made extensive plans to continue several projects in secret hidden bunkers within the existing military research program. As an Iranian scientist wrote, the work would be divided in two: covert secret structure and goals, and overt. Documents also described, these were intercepted by the Israelis, also describe a series of meetings in late 2003 where Iran's nuclear program managers discussed ways to keep their scientists busy with nuclear relevant research after the initiative was terminated. And the covert nuclear program continued under the management of the Organization of Defensive Innovation and Research. And an Iranian official wrote in a memo dated from September 3rd, 2003, "Let there be no mistake. The amount of personnel in the overt and covert parts will not decrease. The structure will not become smaller, and every sub-project will supervise both its overt and covert parts." The Ali Akbar Salehi, director of the Iranian Atomic Energy organization and a member of Iran's nuclear negotiating team, revealed in a January 22nd, 2019 interview that Iran deceived the Americans and Europeans about the shutdown of the reactor, claiming that Iran did not fill the reactor core with cement. And these revelations really illustrated that Iran had no desire to keep the letter and the text and the spirit of the Iran deal. And there's just more I can read. The Iranian leaders and Iranian allies and Hezbollah, as well as the former Ba'athist regime in Syria, viewed the Iran deal as a huge victory for Iran, to quote the Syrians. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, admitted in 2017 that it could not verify whether Iran was fully implementing the agreement. And there's just more and more that I write in this piece. And by the way, the Iranians, since at least May 1979, the Ayatollah was developing a bomb, and an atomic bomb. And in May 1979, the Ayatollah Mohammad Beheshti approached Dr. Freydun Fesharaki, who was a top Iranian nuclear scientist in Tehran. And during this meeting, Beheshti handed Dr. Fesharaki documents compiled during the Shah on the production of nuclear weapons. Beheshti conveyed the following orders to Dr. Fesharaki: "It is your duty to build this bomb for the Islamic Republican Party," which was the name of the ruling party then. "Our civilization is in danger and we have to do it." So Beheshti told Dr. Fesharaki that the costs of the program were not a problem and dispatched him to the West to recruit Iranian nuclear scientists and exile. There's a lot more I can read, but I want to give the readers a taste that there's quite a bit of information to show that Iran was not a good actor. And while I share the concerns of people on the so-called anti-war side about boots on the ground, given our failure in Iraq and Afghanistan, the lost lives on both sides, and the difficulty of regime change, the anti-war left and the anti-war so-called right are basically just lying to us, and you can't tell them all this information because they'll say it's either an Israeli forgery or the Mossad or the CIA, or it's warmongering and everything else. But the fact of the matter is what we're discussing and what I'm reading to you in the audience is just a long history of how totalitarian regimes cannot be trusted to keep to the letter and spirit of arms control agreements. No, it was not Iran, it was not the US or Israel that pushed Iran to build its nuclear program. Despite the Iran deal that Obama pushed through, which was one of his many bad foreign policies, Iran continued to build and continued to lie to the West. And that's the nature of the art of deception as practiced by Sun Tzu, the ancient Chinese military strategist, as well as also aspects of Islamic military doctrine of hudnas, which are strategic truces, as well as taqiyya. So, can we trust Iran based on what we're saying? I don't think so.
Yeah, definitely not.
Yeah. Yeah, so do you have any closing comments that you'd like to tell the listeners? Where can people find your written works, the videos, the interviews you've done, as well as more information about Conservatives for Ukraine?
Sure. Conservatives for Ukraine with the letter 4, that's on Facebook, and it's also on Twitter. You can find me on YouTube at The Centrist Post. And you can also find my blog at Lauren Kamel Morris, Comele, Lauren Kamel Morris, and you can read what I've written about Ukraine and the communists in Austin and various other things like that.
Yes, I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to go to the No Kings protest. Maybe we can do that in a follow-up show. We were talking about so much about foreign policy. I just totally forgot about it and just remembered now. So perhaps we could do it in a follow-up show, maybe a short, like half-hour segment, for example, where you can talk about that and give your impressions, because I'd be very curious. Thank you so much, Lauren, for coming. Can people follow you on Twitter, by the way? Do you have an X account, don't you?
I did. I do. I haven't seen. I've been doing most of it on the Centrist Post. on Twitter at the Centrist Post. So yeah.
Okay.
So it's just a matter of a computer thing. I've been logged in as Lauren Morris for a while, but now I'm doing just more on the Centrist Post. So yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Lauren, for joining us. I really appreciate it. Always a great guest, friend of the show. Well, let's pray for the people of Ukraine, and citizens on both sides of the conflict of Ukraine, Russia, Iran, Israel, whatnot. And let's hope for the victories of freedom against political and economic freedom against totalitarianism. And let's pray for our country too, as well, that hopefully we can have a better future and more sober-minded leaders at the helm, crafting economic and political and foreign policies. Thank you so much, Lauren, and you have a great day. God bless.
Okay.